Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary and today's video is going to be the best books that I read in 2020. I don't know if this video is going to go up before or after my worst books of 2020. I've already filmed that video, but I have a feeling it might go up after this one. I don't know the order that I'm going to do them, but regardless, if you want to know what the worst / most disappointing books that I read, I'll either link that somewhere or you can subscribe and it'll be up in a week. But I tried really hard to get this list down to 10 books because I thought like top 10 would be a good number. It didn't really work out that way. I have 13 on this list, but I did separate them by genre. So we will be going through by genre and I will have timestamps down below in case you only really care about historical fiction or sci-fi or whatever the case may be. But speaking of sci-fi, that's where I think we're going to start. So I have two books that I consider like hard science fiction. First of which is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a classic sci-fi. This book is first contact with aliens, really atmospheric and dreamy in the setting. And it basically just follows this group of astronauts on this ship, and they have this thing called HAL, which at this point I can't remember what it stands for, but it's like the automation system basically of the spaceship. And in the beginning of this book, they find something on the moon, I think. It's been a while since I read this. I think I read this in May. But they find something on the moon that like links them to Uranus, and they're thinking Uranus is where like these other aliens are living, or have been at least. And so there's this group of astronauts going out there to see them. Something goes wrong on the ship and the automated system tries to kill everyone on the ship basically. Really atmospheric and almost eerie in the buildup, and I don't know, very bizarre in the end, in the come down. I still haven't seen this movie. We own it, but I haven't watched it. So I need to watch the film for this one. But yes, this is definitely one of my favorite books that I read this year. And if you like First Contact with Aliens, science fiction, and you haven't read this, I think it's worth a shot. I would read this one. Then the other hard science sci-fi that I read this year is the Remembrance of Earth's Past series. I have the Three Body Problem here. There's two other books in this series. This is a translated work from Chinese. This is another First Contact with Aliens story, but in this one, unlike in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you don't know, they don't like meet the aliens until near the end. In this one, you meet the aliens right away. So it like pretty much opens with, boom, Earth has been contacted by aliens. This series I thought was so inventive and imaginative, and the second book discusses like why perhaps we haven't been contacted by aliens yet, which I thought was crazy. People have complained about this book not having very good characters. I kind of disagree, especially the second book, The Dark Forest. I feel like I really related to Luoji and like his sort of quest and what he was doing in his life. I quite enjoyed his character development and the way that his character went, but I do understand that criticism. So if you rely on characters to really get you through a narrative, these books aren't going to be for you. But the concepts in these books are fantastic and I loved them. So again, if you like hard science fiction, I would highly, highly recommend it. My dog just saw a bird fly out the window and he made the funniest face. I'm going to move on to fantasy, but the first book that I want to talk about is like a sci-fi fantasy. I don't know which category it should go in. And it is actually, I would say, my favorite book that I read this year, and that is Middle Game by Shauna McGuire. This is a, like I said, like a sci-fi fantasy world where there's like alchemy, and there's two twins who were separated at birth, and now they communicate through quantum entanglement. And it just follows their life of them trying to sort of like solve a puzzle for the universe. It's really hard to explain. It's Roger and Dodger, and Roger is skilled with words and languages. Dodger is skilled with math and numbers. And they were created through alchemy. And so it's got a lot of interesting concepts, and there's a lot of really interesting, like layering plot points that come in this book. I really love this book, and I think there's going to be other books in this universe that aren't quite sequels, but they are like tangentially related. This was my favorite book of the year. It's very controversial. It's very weird. Controversial is a dumb word, but like people either love it or they hate it. It's super weird. I've heard a lot of people really didn't like it, but I actually loved it. I'm trying to get my boyfriend to read it, but I have a feeling he won't like it, and then I'd be sad. The other fantasy sci-fi sort of mix that I wanted to talk about is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Twisted Glory. This is a collection of short stories by Raphael Bob Waksberg, who is the creator of BoJack Horseman. They're just absurdist short fiction. They're all written almost in a contemporary style, which I really appreciate. There's one story in the Raphael Bob Waksberg one it's the one the cover is based on, but it's basically following a guy who works at what is essentially Disney World, but instead of dressing up like Disney characters, you dress up as former presidents. It's just goofy stuff like that, very funny. But that book basically talks about like all the different stages in relationships and the way that love works for different people. I just thought those stories were like heartwarming and touching. My favorite story in there was probably The Up-and-Comers, which is about a group of like people in a band who get drunk one night and discover that when they're drunk they have superpowers. I really loved that book. Yeah, I would highly recommend that. Then the last book in my fantasy list is What Should Be Wild by Julia Fine. This is essentially like a dark fairy tale-esque type story, but it follows Maisie, who is a cursed child. She's a descendant of cursed women. And basically she was born with the ability to where if she touches something that's alive, it dies. And if she touches something that is dead, it comes back to life. So she can't have any physical contact with any living things, or dead things, I guess, but like any organic life matter. And then there's these woods behind her house, and apparently all of the cursed women that she is descended of have all gone into the woods and never come back out, so she's never allowed to go into the woods. And then one day her dad goes missing, and she has to enlist the help of some people to like solve this ancient riddle type thing and find her dad in the middle of the forest. This gets super, super dark, but I really loved this, and I felt like it has like a really beautiful like romance element, but also like it's about a girl trying to figure out who she is, and she's like 17 or 18, but she's never left her house, she's never gone to school, so you realize like how truly lonely she is. But yes, I really loved this. I think if you are a fan of like dark fairy tales, myths, stuff like that, you would really like this. My other favorite part of this book is that there are like interspersed with the main narrative is the stories of the cursed women. So you get to hear Maisie hear like almost like fairy tales and lore what happened to her ancestors, but you also see the ancestors tell their story as if it's happening right now, if that makes sense. But I loved this book. Obviously, it's in my best books of the year, and I would highly recommend it. I had one mystery thriller that I really, really loved and wanted to talk about, and it is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This book is a Turn of the Screw, I think, a retelling, but it follows our main character who is a live-in nanny in this house in the Scottish countryside, and it's a smart house. So the house basically like, it's like, Alexa, turn on the lights or whatever. But it's a smart house, and the parents of the children that she's supposed to be watching go away. She's in charge of the kids full time, and the story opens with her writing a letter to her attorney because she's in jail for murdering one of the children. And it's basically her telling her story to her attorney saying like, I didn't do this, this is what happened, and like laying out the story that way. I thought it was a really interesting way to go about it. I also listened to this on audiobook, and I really liked it because it's like she's telling a story, but when you listen to it in an audiobook, you're being told the story. I don't know. I really love this book, and I want to read more by Ruth Ware. I loved that book, and I think if you are interested in a good mystery thriller, like haunted house, is the house haunted type of book, I think that one is a good one, definitely. Then I read one horror that I rated 5 stars, and it was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. But this follows Vic McQueen, who when she is a child, she has a bike that she can ride across this bridge and find lost things. So anything that she's looking for, she can find if she goes across this bridge. It's called her Inscape. And then one day she goes looking for trouble, and she meets Charles Manx, who has a car that works as his Inscape and takes kids to this place called Christmas Land. He basically is like a child murderer, child kidnapper. And Victoria McQueen becomes the first person to escape from Charles Manx. And then it follows her when she's older, has her own 12-year-old son, and Charles Manx comes after her again. So this book is really, really good. I can't tell you what people complain about without spoiling it. So if you really want to know, you can like look. I'm sure there are trigger warnings for stuff, especially like sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual misconduct, etc. But yeah, I thought this was amazing. So I really want to watch the show now too. I think this has a TV show based on it. Now we can talk about some nonfiction, and both of the books that I rated. Can you sit down? Sit down. Thank you. Good boy. What a silly dog. I don't know if you can see him. He's back in that corner now. Both of the nonfiction that I rated really highly this year were memoirs. The first was Educated by Tara Westover. This is the memoir of a girl who is, or who was, I guess. She grew up in, not a cult, but she grew up in rural Idaho in this Mormon family, and her dad was not mentally well, and he got it into his head that the government was trying to kill them. The government was in control of everything, so they had to can their own food, grow their own food, etc. They were never allowed to go to school because the government controlled schools and was going to turn his kids against him, and they were never allowed to go to the hospital. So she talks about times when they would get really hurt. Her dad ran a scrapyard, and she and all of her siblings worked on the scrapyard. And basically, as time goes on, Tara starts to question the way that her life is going, and she eventually ends up going to college and then going to get a PhD from Oxford. So it's sort of like someone who has a hard past who is able to get through it and get past it. And the other memoir that I'm going to talk about is kind of similar in vein, where like it's a really hard childhood. It talks a lot about that. She talks a lot about the abuse she suffers at the hands of her dad and her brother, and the way that her parents treat her versus the way that her other siblings get treated. I thought this book was amazing. I listened to it as an audiobook, which I would highly recommend. I just thought it was great. The other memoir that I really loved was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This book is so good. This, if I had to like rank those two, I thought about not talking about Educated, but I felt like I couldn't because I love them both so much, but they are very similar in theme. Her family, Jeanette Walls' family, aren't like super religious. They're just, her dad is an alcoholic and a chronic liar. He can't hold a job. Her mom doesn't want to work. She wants to be an artist. And it's just about like growing up with nothing. So they basically are homeless and nomadic, and they go from place to place. And everywhere they go, their dad gets them into trouble, and their mom just sort of goes along with it. And it's just all these stories about growing up on the road and growing up without anything until eventually they have to go to West Virginia, where her dad is from. And she sees sort of his parents are really abusive to him. It's like implied that he was sexually abused as a child. And so you like sort of get to understand more about him and why maybe he is the way that he is. And then the more you get to understand him, the more you understand her mom and why she is the way that she is. But it's just this story about how she and her siblings tried so hard to get their parents to do, like, get on the right track, actually be able to live a life, but they were never really able to. This book opens with her living in New York City with her husband and seeing her parents digging through trash cans on the street because they're homeless in New York. So you know that it's not going to have a happy ending for them, but it's just so interesting to watch her come to terms with the fact that, like, her life and her parents' life aren't the same. But yeah, I really loved this book, and I thought it did a really good job of handling what it is like to be impoverished and like what homelessness is like. For historical fiction, I am putting in Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. This has a little bit of a magical realism twist. This is about Ursula Todd, who dies on the day she's born, and then every time she dies after that, she goes back to the start and starts over again. So it's a little bit like Groundhog's Day, but she doesn't remember her previous lives. She only has a tiny inkling. It's like a premonition. This was a little repetitive at times, and that's like one of the biggest criticisms that I've seen, but I don't really know what people are expecting from a book where someone's reliving the same thing over and over again, but I digress. This is set around, she's born around World War I, and then it moves to her life around World War II, and she's got a very interesting connection in World War II, so I found that really intriguing. I don't know, it was hard because so many times her life just went so wrong, and you just got to sort of watch her go down that path until it killed her, and then she went back to the start. I love this book. I thought this was, like, first of all, a really interesting idea, and there's a series based on this family, so I don't know which siblings the other book follows, but I just thought this was really interesting, and I would highly recommend it if you are interested in that type of story. Like, I think I'm going to give this to my mom. So good. I loved this book. And now we are going to talk about the contemporary romance books that I loved this year. So first, I wanted to talk about The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is a YA contemporary with a little bit of a magical realism, but this follows a half Taiwanese, I believe. It's been a while since I've read this book as well, so I apologize if that's incorrect, but I believe she's half Taiwanese girl who is like 15, I think, and her mom kills herself. And that's at the very beginning of the book. That's not a spoiler. But this book details her going to Taiwan and meeting her mom's family for the first time and sort of trying to reconnect with her mom. But after her mom dies, she begins seeing her mom as a red bird that comes to her. And so she feels like this bird told her to go to Taiwan, and that's sort of why she does. And there's other, like, magical realism-y twists that happen. I loved this book. It made me cry. So, again, I just thought it was so well written and, like, complex enough to really get across the ideas, but still, like, simple enough to where I could tell that it would be easy for a teenager to read and really relate to. Yeah, I thought the book was beautiful. I really loved it. And it does a really good job of tackling, again, this isn't my story, so I don't know if this is true. I'm not an Own Voices reviewer, but I think it did a really good job for me of sort of understanding what that loneliness must be like when you lose your only tie. So she looks Taiwanese, but she only knows her white family now. Her mom, who was her last tie sort of to her Taiwanese culture, is gone. So she's going to look for part of herself as well. And I thought that was just really well handled. Second to last, I guess, but also not least, is Clappany Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a book told in verse, and it follows two sisters, Camino and Yahaira. Camino lives in the Dominican Republic, and Yahaira lives in New York, and they find out that they are sisters after the death of their father. He dies in a plane crash, which is based on a real plane crash. But it's just about them reconciling their grief with the fact that they have this new sibling, and so that's kind of exciting, but then also the fact that their dad lied to them their whole lives, and they're, like, in some cases their moms lied to them, and just, like, sort of realizing that the person who they both loved more than anyone else in the world wasn't who they thought he was. Again, beautifully handled. If you can listen to the audiobook for anything that Elizabeth Acevedo does, she does her own audiobooks, I would highly recommend it. This one, since there are 2 points of view with 2 distinct voices, she did get someone else to read for, I don't know which sister she read for and which sister the other person read for, but it was incredible. I loved that book. And then the last book on this list is The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This is the only romance that I'm reading, like, best of the year. I didn't expect to love this as much as I did, but I really, really did. This follows, I can't remember the characters' names now. That is so terrible. This follows Kai, who is an autistic man living in California, and he feels like he has no feelings. He feels like he can't emotionally connect to anybody, and so his mom, who really wants him to get married and, like, sort of get settled in on his life, goes back to Vietnam, where they're from, to find him a wife, basically. And she finds this girl who is mixed race. I think she's half white, half Vietnamese, named Esme. Well, I don't remember what her Vietnamese name is, but she goes by Esme in the book because it's, like, her Americanized name. And her mom brings her back to the U.S., to California, and she says, stay with my son for the summer, and at the end of the summer, you guys can either get married or you can go back to Vietnam. And it just sort of goes from there. So it's like this forced relationship, which is a trope that I think is really cute. I think it can be kind of, like, too convenient, but I do enjoy it. So I liked it. It gave me all sorts of butterflies. I thought they had really good chemistry. I was really rooting for them. I also liked that Esme had her own sort of life plans that didn't revolve around Kai, even though, like, the plan of this whole thing is, like, get this guy to fall in love with me so I can get married. But she sort of, like, does her own thing and lives her own life and is independent as much as one can be when you're entirely dependent on someone else for, like, your livelihood. But I don't know. I loved this book. I thought it was really, really well written. It does have a couple of, like, steamier scenes, but it's not, like, super smutty. So if that's something you don't like, you can definitely skim the steam. Yeah, I love this book. I thought it was great. This is part of a series. I haven't read any of the other books in the series, but the first one is The Kiss Quotient. The other books follow the other characters that, like, made appearances in this book. So I know how one of the books is going to end because they go to a character's wedding, and I'm pretty sure that's the characters from The Kiss Quotient. So, anyways. But yes, I do plan on reading the other books in the series. That's it. Those are the 13 books that I really, really loved this year. Those are my best of 2020. Again, not all of those books came out this year. I don't think any of them came out this year. Did any of them? I don't think so. Maybe Clappany Land. I don't know. But those are my favorite books of 2020. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see the worst books of 2020, I will either have it linked down below or you can subscribe and it'll be up in a week. And that's it. I hope you guys are having a great December, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!